Welcome to Stories from the Center of the Universe, the podcast about the human experience.
Bryan Kirk, welcome to the Center of the Universe.
Hey, thanks, Paul. It's really great to be here. It's an honor. I looked at some of your guest list and especially good friends with Brett, who's recently on, and hope I meet your expectations and the quality of folks you've had before. Such a great opportunity.
I appreciate those words, Bryan. Well, let's talk about Brett. How do you two know each other, and what's the nature of your relationship with Brett?
Well, I will tell you, Brett and I met as freshmen in college at Campbell University there in North Carolina. He came from a military family. I did not, but both being freshmen, neither one of us being prior service, we just hit it off. Believed we were the next heroes of the Army. We were certain, just give us a chance and get out of our way. Let us prove ourselves, and we just hit it off. So we have been friends. I am fortunate to call him my best friend. Been through some good times and bad times, but both in service, active, and then even after he transitioned, stayed close in each other's wedding. Kids grew up even when we were separate. Only stationed together actually one time, I believe, briefly for some school at Fort Benning, but have just been fortunate to stay really close. So one of my dearest friends for sure.
Yeah, and you were telling me before we started recording, and I think when we spoke a week or two ago, that your middle child is moving within a few minutes of where Brett is now. And so how fortunate do you feel to have your kid moving that close to your best friend?
Yeah, unbelievable. Actually the oldest, but yep.
The oldest. Sorry.
Yep, of course. Jesse's moving up there in the next coming week. So yeah, the specialness of that, Brett's son actually provided sort of locations for her to consider to live. They've already arranged to take off work and help her move in the coming weeks. And now I have a perfect excuse to go see Brett as well as seeing family. So she'll be about 4 or 5 hours closer than she is now down in Texas. So looking forward to seeing them both more, I hope.
Yeah, isn't it neat? I mean, I just have to highlight this. Brett's son voluntarily helping out your daughter find a part of the town to live in. That's really cool.
Yeah, it's really neat that they've maintained relationship as well. He 2 sons. I had 2 daughters until much later we had a son. So they've just grown up knowing each other and staying in touch, even without us in the loop. So they're not as close, obviously, as Kristin and I are with Brett and Amy. But yeah, just how that worked out and the opportunity is just really special.
I usually end with this, Bryan, but I think I'm going to ask this question maybe for the first time ever early. Can you tell me about your family?
Yeah, sure. So probably normal story for many. Met my wife in college. She was also from North Carolina, but we didn't know each other. We only lived an hour apart on either side of Charlotte. I grew up just east of Charlotte. Pretty interesting family. Just interesting in the fact that I have a twin sister and a little brother and sister that are twins. So 2 sets of twins. And I always get the follow-up question, almost always, well, are you identical? I refer back to she's a girl, I'm a boy, so that's not how it works.
Let's hope we all aren't identical. Yeah.
Exactly. But that was sort of neat. Grew up in a good home, very, very blessed with parents who were supportive. Went to a small Christian school. Graduated from a class of 4. One of whom was my twin sister. So interesting origin story. Yep. And then went to Campbell where met Kristin. So we actually met early in college towards the end of my freshman year. So began dating pretty early, got engaged and married with 1 semester left. Working my sneaky wiles, I was able to convince her that, once I commissioned, there's no telling how quick or where the Army would send me somewhere. So it was best if we got married earlier rather than later, so we could enter that journey together. So I'm not sure how I put all that together, but it obviously worked.
Well, it sounds like you were smitten from the get-go, and that stayed with you.
Yeah. Blessed to still be with her. So over the course of the next 20 plus years, ended up with 2 daughters and a son. And we were joking, before we got started that your kids kind of don't volunteer to be a part of what you did, but by default they are. So we were joking about the fact that both of my daughters realized the longest they had ever lived in one place was when they went to college. And in fact, we actually moved the summer my oldest went to college, and then we moved again while my youngest was in college, or middle child was in college. So really neat. But they both thrived there, as part of that process. So still have one at home, a son, Nathan, and he's doing well. He'll be going into high school this year. So
very cool. And your daughter's moving to the Richmond area, your oldest, and you're already a grandfather too, right?
Paul, that was probably the biggest or closest point I had to a midlife crisis. So my last job was working with college students, and every now and then I would say something that caused me to realize they were not alive when I was in the Army initially. But I could overlook that because I did PT with them. It's just our military culture. You perform, and you have some young folks and some older folks, but there's no distinction when you're on the PT field necessarily. So I didn't see myself that way. But all of a sudden, you're exactly right. I'm a grandfather, and couldn't be happier, couldn't be more excited. But that realization to myself, sort of a very real life position, was jolting, although exciting.
Yeah, my wife will tell me that I've had a few midlife crises, and I'm not a grandparent yet, so I guess I've got another one coming.
Right. Well, I'm excited. It is a great point also to reflect on where you are, where you're going, priorities. It is true. I anticipate that my kids will be like, I can't believe you let her do that. It's a granddaughter. I can't believe you let her do that. And I'm thinking to myself, yep, that's 100% going to be true, because those responsibilities as a parent aren't mine. I can truly just enjoy. So
just have fun with her.
Yeah, exactly. I've already bought her some SF gear. I was at Fort Bragg, the previously known center of the universe, and they have a new SF museum that I went to while I was there. We were looking at some holistic health and fitness stuff with some of the things they have going on, and I put my foot down and said, we got to go to the SF museum. And so I got her some baby swag. One of them is a cool little t-shirt that says "Liberate Pineland," which, nobody else will know what that means. But obviously holds a special place, since I myself have been in Pineland there at Fort Bragg. So
yeah. Did you get her a beret?
No beret yet. Too early for that. Pink onesie with the SF crest, and then the t-shirt for Liberating Pineland.
So, man, that's great. I love all of that. All right. So you mentioned you grew up east of Charlotte. What was your childhood like? And by the way, I want to get to, and we can talk about it now or later, this idea of being one of 4, and you're related. You're a twin with one of the other 4 at a tiny Christian school, and then going to Campbell University, which is not a small school, right? I mean,
sure.
Campbell, a mid-sized kind of college.
Right.
I mean,
about 5,000, 6,000 now.
Yeah, that's a lot more than double-digit number of kids you went to school with.
Sure.
Yeah. So let's go back to what it was like growing up in Monroe.
Well, I will reinforce how blessed I was to have 2 parents who stayed together and are still together, and the power of that sort of in my life. Not always perfect by any means. I mean, ups and downs. moving through the phases of childhood. It was always interesting to me as we did different classes. For example, if we did driver's ed or we went to somewhere else, it was neat to always have my twin sister. You've also got an in with the opposite sex. She would leverage me against the guy she was interested in. I would leverage her. So those are sort of neat things about having a twin, but you were never alone. And then as my younger brother and I grew up, we sort of bonded, as brothers do through fighting as well as adventures. So I had a great full, experience with family close to me growing up. We also only lived about 30 minutes from both of their parents. So I was able to, and their relatives. So I was able to see cousins. So, something as I've gotten older and moved and more people, I don't take for granted the specialness of both immediate family and the ability to see cousins and things and be impacted by that and spending time with grandparents. So the school was a part of our church, definitely small. I mean, I'm trying to remember now, between kindergarten and 12th grade, there had to be less than 100 people total. And I'm thinking it was actually closer to 80 most times. I don't remember for sure, but like I said, my graduating class, half of us were family, and the other guy's name happened to be Bryan as well. So, also interesting. What I felt like when I left that school was I had something to prove to myself. I grew up reading about special operations, in Vietnam, playing Army at the house. My mom would tell you stories about my brother and the boys in the neighborhood, like probably most at that time, playing out in a big field behind our house. She's got one story which is mostly true. I was up on the roof because I realized the advantage that height gives when you're trying to locate other people hiding. And she just recalls me jumping off the roof and trying to figure out why I was on the roof in the first place, which all seemed normal to me. Like, of course I would be on the roof. But clearly some indications maybe that the Army was the right career path. But I grew up reading about it. As we started looking at colleges, I remember specifically, looking at North Carolina State. That's where my dad went. Applying and being accepted there. And then we found Campbell. Campbell felt like a really good fit. So there was probably between 4,000 and 5,000 there. So it was big enough where you could meet different people and have a lot of different experiences. It was far enough from home. It was probably 3.5 hours from my home. And it was also home to one of the best ROTC programs there in the nation, which I knew I was interested in the Army. I wasn't sure what that was going to look like. I knew my parents wanted me to go to college, so it was just assumed. Like, I don't remember ever deliberately making the decision, well, I'm going to go to college. It was just expected. So I didn't really understand how those two could go together. Started learning about ROTC. We obviously didn't have any of that at my school. So I showed up meeting Brett as a brand new freshman who grew up as a military brat. Right there at Fort Bragg. Our program at Campbell at that time was heavy green to gold. So folks who, leave the enlisted force, chapter out specifically to go to ROTC and then commission. Brett and I were in a minority not being prior service. So it was a very unique opportunity for me to hear from people with actual experience in the Army, even as I sort of went through those ROTC wickets. And really pivotal in that time frame, as I was a college student, were probably three people. One was a captain, Captain Niles, armor officer, who was one of our primary instructors, who made a big impact on me. He was very professional, also was very serious. So we were always trying to get him to break roll, which he did and would laugh. So he made a big impact, probably the reason I was an armor officer. And then Sergeant Major Dean Reed, who was a Green Beret. Everything that I had read about embodied in him, and got to hear a few stories from him, but gave so much of himself to our program. And then lastly was a a guy two years ahead. So I guess he would have been a junior when Brett and I were freshmen. Still call him a good friend, Kevin. Kevin is the one that when I was at the decision point as a sophomore about whether or not I would continue, I was not scholarship, did not get selected for scholarship, so it wasn't contracted or anything like that. And he took me to lunch, which consisted of bean soup because he was a broke college student like the rest of us, in his office. But he sat me down, looked me in the eye and said, Bryan, why haven't you contracted? And I said, I'm not sure. And he said, Bryan, I think you are good at this and you would make a good officer. I really recommend that you consider pursuing commissioning in the Army. And that was it, Paul. His clear support and recommendation is the next time I talk to my folks, I said, I'm all in. We're going to do this. I'm signing up. And the rest is sort of history on that. I did not have a big transition issue for going from small private school. Our curriculum was also different. We were in a little different classroom environment for most of our classes, sort of self-paced. But the fundamentals that I learned while I was there and just seeking to be a good student really is the same today. It's about time management and then the discipline to follow it. And I had that. And then ROTC added to that with some of that instruction. So I was a little concerned about that for myself and found that if you are dependable, if you work hard and do your best and admit failure when you need to, you're going to be in a good place regardless of whether it's school, work, whatever the case is. So it was not as big of a transition as I thought. I really loved college, loved being with Brett. We had such great times together. And that's really my sort of high school to college story, really.
I have to go back to the fact that you're a twin. I've heard tales of you can read each other's minds. Your genetic codes are so similar that you gravitate to the same sorts of things. Are those ideas? Do those ring true for you and your twin?
Not to the extent maybe of the discussions that make those stories. I think as we grew, we were close early. As we hit our teenage years and sort of went to college, we sort of split apart. I think we're probably, or our relationship became a little bit more distant as I went to college. She went to college locally, stayed at home. But I think we're probably now, as we're entering different phases of our life, getting back to talking more, being a little bit closer. So we never, I can't think of any specific instances where I would say, oh, absolutely. Now, there were a lot of things that I probably take for granted others may have to speak about that we didn't have to speak. We probably understood each other a lot more just because of our time together in a small environment and also being twins. So I do think it's a special relationship. And as I moved away with the Army, it made it harder to maintain that level of closeness. So it's nice to be settled down now and be able to come back together, and really develop that again.
Yeah, and the demands on your time are not as severe as they were when you were regular Army, right?
Right. Absolutely.
You can travel and plan a little more freely.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. It's weird. I still think of it as, I use the word leave. I was talking to a colleague at the university and I said something, I'll be on leave. And then I have to backspace and say, what do they call that? I'll be on not pass, but vacation. I'm taking a day off. So, and I just used, we were checking a pay change and I told my wife, our LES should be in. I'm like, crap, it's not an LES. What do they call that? So I am grateful for that experience, but also trying to, assimilate to my new role wholly as a civilian.
How many years total were you active?
A little over 27. So hard to believe, man.
So 27 years.
Yeah.
That's more than half of your lifetime. That is overwhelmingly more than half of your adult time, right? I mean, 4 years of college and you were doing ROTC and that's not part of your 27, but you were still doing military things.
True.
And then you've been retired for not that long. And so,
right.
yeah.
Yeah.
if you need help, I was a traditional guardsman, so I know all the terms on both sides.
There you go. You feel free to correct me and add that in the notes. What he meant to say was
Right.
this. So it's hard to believe. I did not anticipate I would stay in the Army this long. Not that I didn't want to, but when I commissioned, I mean, you know how it is when you're young. You have such a poor perception of time because you've lived so briefly, and to be at 27 years, and frankly, my wife and I decided we really love this area. We knew I was not going to get the chance to command as an 06, and so we love the area. We love working with the college and really what I began to call my replacements, those cadets. So why not settle down here? So I could have stuck it out for one more PCS and gone, somewhere. But really that would have probably been 2 more moves. And we were like, what are we doing? Like, we love it here. We're happy here. Didn't plan to end up here. We were down in Tampa, Florida for my last job. I had an exit path planned when I didn't get picked up, for 06 command, which was which is what I wanted to do there. So I had already an off ramp, and a good friend Joel, who is the professor of military science at Norwich, said, "Hey man, you should really consider this." And we had met at the War College, and so sort of on a whim, put my packet in, and the only 2 schools eligible the year I competed or open were University of North Georgia and the Citadel. And you don't actually get to pick, but you could preference. And University of North Georgia was right in between both my daughters at that point in college. One was at Campbell, one was at Florida State. And so somehow I was very blessed. I had worked with several North Georgia folks as well, and couldn't be happier. Plus, I'm a fan of the mountains. So.
Yeah, well, they're beautiful and relaxing. Any mountains I've been to, I'm sure the same is true for North Georgia. What are you doing now for North Georgia? So,
as I was transitioning out of the professor of military science role, just as a brief background, there's only 6 senior military colleges, and those 6 are the only ones who have their professor of military science is an 06. The rest will be 05s. There's a couple of 04s fleeted up, or a couple of anomalies, but broadly that's the way it works. So of the 6, University of North Georgia is the only one that's only Army. So we don't have any other ROTC program at the university, which is really neat. So our whole core of cadets is all Army cadets. Wear the Army uniform, follow Army doctrine, those sorts of things. So after, it's a 3-year posting. After your first year, you have an opportunity to ask to stay a 4th year, and then depending on your performance and what the cadet command needs, they can authorize that. So after my first year here, we decided I'm not going to ask for an extension. At that point, we were figuring out if we were going to PCS or stay here. So as fortune would have it, by the end of my 3rd year, we had a new president at the university, President Mike Shannon, and he planned some reorganization that opened a spot in the university staff that supports our ROTC and cadet team. So right now I'm a associate vice president and chief of staff for our Cadet Leadership Academy. So I work for our superintendent, who is sort of the cadet side that's equivalent to our provost over academics. So the organizational structure is streamlined. So the core, ROTC, cadet recruit, all report to him, and I'm that chief of staff, which, as a funny aside, I thought it would be funny, associate vice president. So AVP, my recommendation for my name tag was ASS VP, associate VP, of course with a period, but that was frowned upon. So I did not get to be the
I think it's funny to suggest that, but I don't think you would like wearing it two weeks in.
Probably true. Probably true. So I grew up, with a bunch of amazing folks. I know Jeff Teagues was on your show at one point, being around people like that who take their job seriously, their responsibility seriously, want to be the best leader they can, but try not to take themselves too seriously. So I've had some really good role models. So yeah, you're right though. It probably would have been a bad call.
Yeah. You mentioned the 6. Let me see if I can name them. I know you can name them, Bryan, but this is a little brain teaser for me this morning. Norwich, Citadel, VMI, Tech, North Georgia, and I can't think of the 6th.
I'm having to write them down because you did them in a different order than I usually do them.
Sorry.
Texas A&M.
Oh, A&M, of course.
Yeah. A&M.
So everything's East Coast except for A&M.
Pretty much, yep.
Yeah,
that's right.
Wow.
And it's a mix. So Citadel and Virginia Military Institute are all cadets, right? So they don't have any civilian population. And then Norwich, Virginia Tech, us, and Texas A&M have civilian students. Norwich is a little unique in their organization. They were actually the first ROTC program, or is where it was established. So we compare ourselves more to Virginia Tech and Texas A&M as far as undergrad students. Our cadets sit in classes with regular civilian students. It's like ROTC at scale, basically. Yeah. Now, Virginia Tech and Texas A&M, much larger D1 schools. We're a D2 school for all our sports, which, by the way, we had four teams in the semifinals over the last 2 weeks for softball, tennis, and golf. So and baseball, actually. So they were doing really well this year. But Virginia Tech and Texas A&M have they're on the TV on Friday nights because of football. So and actually I think Texas A&M's basketball team did pretty good. So. But yeah, you nailed it. 5 out of 6 is pretty good.
Yeah, I'm disappointed I didn't get all 6. But by the way, my son just graduated from Virginia Tech.
Yeah,
and I think he had 0 overlap with anything military his entire life. That's how big Tech's non-military population is. I imagine it's similar at A&M. But yeah. North Georgia, you can feel the military presence, I imagine, everywhere you look.
Oh, absolutely. I'll tell you what, that's one of the things I love. And the president embraces what the Army values mean and stand for. And you can see it on campus. So University of North Georgia is actually 5 campuses total, Power of 5. So Dahlonega is the main campus. That's really the only place where the Corps exists. So on campus, you've got between 7,000 and 8,000. The Corps is between 700 and 800. So we're 8, 9, 10% on a given year of the student body on the Dahlonega campus. We wear uniforms every day, a mixture of your OCPs, your camouflage pattern, and dress uniforms. 1 day a week, usually they have a sort of a cadet uniform, but they're very visible. They're in all the campuses. The drill field is the focal point of the campus. It's the center of campus. So it is. It's funny to me as I think about it, but the cannon goes off every morning, at 06:30 for Reveille. So the whole campus hears that. It goes off at 1700 when they do retreat, and we have a color guard there to raise and lower the flag. So there are some real cool overlaps. We do, PT right there on the drill field. Half of the Corps is on the drill field, half the Corps is up at our practice sports fields, and they sort of rotate. So. You're right. It is one of the things that makes it really special and part of the identity. Now, we also have on our Gainesville campus, we have a new program, only 1 year old. It's a cadet prep program. So if for some reason you want to be in the Corps and you're ineligible to be a student at Dahlonega, which is a 4-year bachelor's degree campus, let's say you're missing a language or a score is a little too low or something else, you can actually go to Gainesville, which is an associate degree campus, take military science, the freshman year in military science, and the goal is to get you qualified to transfer into the Corps there your second year. So that's a new program. We just realized we were missing opportunities because previously, if you couldn't get into Dahlonega, then they went somewhere else to college. So just did that for our first year, learned a lot of things, had some folks that will be coming in this fall out of that program. So we're super excited about that. But we've also got Coney, Blue Ridge, and Cumming campuses. Some of those are a little more heavier on the commuting side, but Dahlonega is just beautiful. There's times when we would have the Corps out after lab on Monday afternoons, and I would tell them, just stop. I'm like, just stop, just look around. Spring and fall especially. Like, what a beautiful place to be. Take a deep breath. Like, get centered, get locked in. Like, I know you got a lot of pressure as a college student, but don't miss the power of you're standing here in this family of green people dressed like you that are training like you. In spite of all these pressures, you're in a good place. Like, let's make sure we're there. So just part of the reason we decided to stay, honestly.
I love all of that. The idea of Army only for North Georgia is a little bit striking, given that it's 2025. The Navy and the Air Force have not tried to start programs there?
Yeah, great question. Originally, in 1873, when we stood up about 152 years ago, it was basically, the land grant university. So they had to have a Corps of Cadets. And as we grew through the years, one of the things that North Georgia didn't have previously that those other schools have is an engineering program. So that, I believe, both especially on the Navy and the Air Force side, was not attractive to them because that's one of their big, degree fields that their officers come in with based on the flights and then the ships and stuff. So initially, that was probably a hesitation on their part. And then in my working with the team there at the university as a professor of military science, and now still going through the approval process with the University System of Georgia, because there's a whole lot of wickets to add things like that. But I anticipate we will actually have an engineering degree within the next year and a half, which is super exciting to me. I love our brothers to the south, especially Georgia Tech. But you can imagine my frustration as I get a guy or a girl who wants to be an engineer. They'll come to North Georgia for the first 2 or 3 years. There's a couple different ways they can do it, and get a math or physics degree and then transfer into Georgia Tech or one of the other schools to finish an engineering degree. So then that school gets their commissioning credit, if they're a distinguished military graduate, all those things. But we usually had 1 or 2 of those a year. Now, we would also have some who started and thought they wanted to be an engineer, loved it at the school so much that they transitioned to be a physics major, math major, something like that. So we're happy to support the cadets and where they're going to serve, in the Army, even if it pains me a little.
Yeah, no, wow. I'm still a little surprised that, and I get the number of wickets you have to go through the state government, and nothing happens quickly through those processes. But I'm still a little shocked that it hasn't happened yet. But I mean, it is what it is, and it has its own unique history. Which, if we go down that rabbit hole, it might be fairly boring, I'm guessing.
Sure. Yeah, I could give you some, but you've got a couple of really high-powered engineering schools in the state of Georgia. So we're a public university. So our ability to differentiate ourselves from those other programs, like, are you going to beat Georgia Tech? I mean, so what we're focused on is pretty exciting, actually. And I'm really proud to say that the university looked and said, what does the Army need? What kind of engineer requirements do they have? So what they're looking at right now broadly is sort of a renewable/sustainable energy focus. And then the other one is sort of like a systems approach, like engineering and as a focus on complex systems. So when we looked at multi-domain operations and overlapping, all the domains at a particular point in time and space to generate effects, like our ability to talk about the complexity and how that impacts our future Army officers really sort of was helpful for them. So that's why I think they're on the right path, and we'll achieve that in the next, like I said, year and a half. So,
well, it's somewhat ironic that the Corps of Engineers came out of the Army, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, they still have.
And I started my time as a combat engineer. There are plenty of disciplines that you can get into that apply in the civilian education of engineers. It just, I hope you guys get accredited for engineering, and it sounds like you guys can do some really cool things. And I think it makes North Georgia a lot more vibrant with those programs in place.
Absolutely.
So it sounds like you guys are on the way there.
Yeah.
Really cool. All right, let's get into what I would call the exciting part here. You're 27 years regular Army. You started Armor, which I get the influence that instructor had on you. I know Armor guys that were in maybe a little bit before you and I were in, where they didn't have access to tanks.
Yeah.
And they would drive golf carts around to figure out how tanks should maneuver, kind of thing. You didn't grow up. You didn't go into that Army, did you?
Oh, so close. You almost nailed it. So the one school I got to go to as a cadet was Airborne School. And I was so excited. I wanted to be an airborne armor officer. Like, I just thought the combat arm of decision, maneuver, and firepower. I mean, let's be honest. If a brand new lieutenant can hit a moving target from a moving tank almost a mile away in the dark, that's a pretty awesome piece of machinery, right? So,
or be part of a drop where you're jumping and there's a tank coming out of the back of a
That's right. So I'm looking at the Sheridans at that point, where the airdroppable. So what we knew at that time was the Sheridan was up for a replacement. It was supposed to be I think it was the XM8 armored gun system that was going to replace the Sheridan, but be airdroppable. Of course, now we're going through the Booker fiasco. But anyways, so on my list, and I love the idea of CAV. Cavalry was just so awesome. So long story short, I end up at Fort Polk, Louisiana, 1st Duty Station, 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment, 1st Squadron, got my Stetson, earned my spurs, but 2nd ACR got rid of their Abrams and Bradleys after Desert Storm, and they were supposed to be the unit fielded with this new tank system. So we had Humvees. Well, guess what got canceled right after I got there? The new up-armored Sheridan, or the Sheridan replacement. Yeah. So I was not in golf carts, but I was in Humvees. And we had a different formation. So I had TOWs, Mark 19 and 50 cal. Some organizations had the TOWs sort of functions as a tank platoon, and then the 50 cals and Mark 19s as a scout. We had a scat formation. So I honestly refer to myself around true tankers as motorized because we didn't have tanks. So I will give you some foreshadowing and tell you for folks who feel like they've missed out or get defeated. I had to reconcile, okay, this is the hand I've been dealt. I'm going to make the best of it. Who would have thought 5, 6, 7 years later, as an ODA team leader, I would be in Afghanistan on Humvees, really GMVs, so souped up Humvees. But Paul, what I learned about maintenance, what I learned about weapon system, what I learned about maneuver, what I learned about load plans, all that stuff that, at the time I was frustrated because it was a Humvee and not a tank. Now all of a sudden put me in position to be value added to a team. So it really, those were one of those things when you look back and you have to take a moment and be disappointed that something doesn't work out like you hoped, but also make the best of it. It's your choice. And when I got to the team and they said, oh, well, here's our GMVs, and they're all looking at each other, for the one time, the junior guy on the team, which at that point I was a captain, but still, these guys had already deployed, it's the knuckle crack, step back, boys, I can help with this one. So what a neat experience that was. So we were motorized, no golf carts.
Yeah, I didn't realize that was the story. I assumed you had 2 or 3 fun years as a lieutenant doing your thing in tanks. But yeah, so to that story, I've learned, I'm embarrassed to say, somewhat recently, or had it codified for me recently. Every person around you, every situation, there is something to be learned and gained from. Every single one. Yeah. It could be misery, that situation you're in, but there's a lot to learn from that situation. And so don't run from it, kind of run toward it.
Right. Yeah. It may not be enjoyable, but if you have the ability to reflect, maybe not while you're going through it, but, for us in the military, if you change jobs every year, is a great point where you are forced to stop and think about the things you didn't finish that you have to pass on. But you can also think about the things you did and the things you learned. So I think you're 100% correct. And I think it's good that you're talking about learning it now. I hope I'm still learning now how to do better at that, because I know I miss opportunities because we can get so busy that we don't make time to learn from that reflection, which is so powerful. And, I've had a couple of key events in the last year between, having a first grandkid, daughters getting married, moving, retiring, where if you don't have those reflection points throughout, you may not recall in the same level of detail, or it's almost overwhelming to realize how much has transitioned. So I think you're spot on with that.
Yeah. All right, so you're an armor officer for how long?
Mm-hmm. So I graduated from Campbell in May. Didn't get OBC, Officer Basic Course, now BOLIC, until August. Was fortunate to become a Gold Bar recruiter, so I stayed there on campus. Went to the high schools and all that. And as a joke, I would just tell you, I so remember our first paycheck as a lieutenant. Thought I was like rolling. We went to the movies, which some of our generation can appreciate. Like, I thought that was like I'd reached the pinnacle. But Scout Platoon Leader course, basic course, and then ended up in January in Ranger School. So did an extra month there, recycled here in lovely Dahlonega.
You got recycled in the mountains.
Yeah, already had my go. I was cruising. I had stress fractures in my foot. So x-rays came back and I got recycled. Great story about that class, I can tell you. But so I didn't get to my unit till April. So almost a year after I graduated. So then I was in the second ACR for about so that would have been 98 until the end of 2000. So really 2.5 years. And that's when, the squadron that I was in had just come back from Haiti at that point. So we had done a pump out to the National Training Center. We supported a couple rotations there at JRTC with the 509th. We drove their vehicles. Our team was like the Div Recon and Reg Recon, all that kind of stuff. And finally was eligible as an officer to put my packet in, to go SF. And that's when I did it. So I was there about 2.5 years.
Let's go back to Ranger School. I have at least two questions. One, can you tell me more about the crew there for your first time through before you got recycled?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I mentioned previously that, Brett and I were not prior service. And one of the things that was so powerful, we had Special Forces guys, NCOs prior and Rangers. And that became something that I envisioned as a proving ground for me, not being prior service, to go to my unit, even as a tanker, right? Even as an armor officer, that would signify not that I was special, but in my mind, it would demonstrate to them that I did something I didn't have to do so that I could be a better leader. Probably, naive, over glorified it. But in my mind, based on what I learned from those NCOs and what I saw that tab and that skill to represent, that's how I pictured it in my mind. So showed up in January, and I'll be honest, I'm standing there. I'm not a huge guy, a mighty 67 inches, tall, less than 200 pounds. But
Bryan, you're 5'7"?
Yeah, 5'7", yeah.
You don't see too many Green Berets at that height, man.
Hey, there are some shorter, for the record, but you're right. And I remember distinctly standing in Ranger School by these just massive specimens of guys who, I realized I would have to stand in front of and lead, and thinking to myself, am I ready for this? Can I do it? Now, I had a great experience in college, was able to do Ranger Challenge there and compete, and knew I had capacity. but this is a different field. I mean, you got Ranger Regiment guys in there, you got this. And so it was a very interesting experience for me to learn to stop judging based on external indicators alone and really allow a system to prove not just potential, but capacity, capability, and more importantly, willingness, to serve. So to your point, I distinctly remember one of those first formations in the dark, looking around me, like I can't even see, back in like third squad, and I can't see, whoever's yelling at us. But quickly found out, physical strength matters, but there's a lot more as well. And in Ranger School, you find out who's the solar ranger, who just shuts down when the sun goes down, who can't function when they don't get food, who can't function when they get put in leadership. So it's a great leveler, and we had a really, really good team going through. And the funny story I would tell you for that first group is, so we were known, this was class 498. You can look it up. We were the Walmart class. And I just talked to a legend here at the Camp Merrill last week as we had a Remembrance and Memorial Day. They have a hill climb, and Tom Wilburn was there, of amazing. He was a first sergeant when I was going through, and people just whispered his name. Like he wouldn't, like if you got caught with 2 boots off, like you were liable to get a negative spot report. You could only take 1 boot off at a time, right? Because you never know when you're going to get attacked. And even in taking off your kit, then we call it the LBE, 1 shoulder. That was it, because you had to be ready to act. But he's a legend. But the Walmart class, so the weather was so bad, we would walk up to do our operations, and instead of staying up on the TVD and walking along the ridge lines and having a patrol base, it was so cold and wet, they had to march us all the way back down the mountain into the barracks. You'd be in there for like 4 or 5 hours, and then you have to march back up. Well, okay, marching up the mountain is bad enough. Marching down it and then back up it the next morning, like people were just quitting in droves. So they actually stopped us on like day 3 and were like, if you start climbing, there's no quitting, because it was so disruptive, because you had to transfer all the equipment and they had to get transportation. So, and I'll never forget coming back down the mountain one night, because it had snowed, and we were actually wearing wet weather bottoms, the old like camouflage, like poncho. I don't think they were Gore-Tex.
They weren't breathable, right?
So yeah. So I don't know what happened, but people just started sitting down with their rucksack and sliding down the mountain. This is a true story. And the RIs just started yelling at us. And I remember distinctly, like I'm very compliant to my RIs, but I remember looking at him and he's yelling at me, and I just remember sitting down and pushing off. There's like equipment scattered all over the hillside. But anyways, one of the nights, we had some Navy guys. This is also true. They were Navy, that got on the payphone, convinced a Dahlonega proper taxi driver to come and pick them up, came back here to Walmart, bought food, and then took it back to camp and distributed it to their buddies. Well, an XRI was like retired and was a security guard at Walmart. So he calls up and says, hey, I didn't know you guys were on phase break. And of course, the night duty, whatever's like, we're not on phase break. He's like, you should probably come down and see this video. So they literally got this surveillance footage. You can see bald-headed dudes walking in with laundry bags, buying food. Well, next thing I know, all of a sudden we're getting roused like, 45 minutes before we were supposed to get up, to head back up the mountain. And the RI's like looking at me, and he's like, do you know anything about what happened? This is your one chance. And I'm like, you mean other than sleeping? Like what could possibly be more important than sleeping? Like who else isn't sleeping? So they collected us all into a room. They dumped everything, Paul. I remember them taking my elbow flashlight, the big D-cell, elbow flashlight, taking the batteries out, dumping it, and looking inside to see if there was any food in there. If they found so much as a salt packet, you were getting a negative spot report. And they recycled like 20% of the class and kicked out another 10% right there on the spot. They took all of our civilian clothes.
Because no pogey bait. It was only MREs.
Oh,
right?
oh, that's right. MREs or chow that they gave us. You were allowed one set of civilian clothes. Like when I went to the doctor to get x-rays, I had to put on civilian clothes. They took all of our civilian clothes and literally threw them in a room and locked the door. They literally cut the cable to the payphone. They're like, okay. And then they moved the entire class out to the airfield. Now, remember, this is February, and we were doing all this because the weather was so bad. Moved the entire class out to the airfield in GP mediums. That was the day I got recycled. That was the day my x-rays came back. So I remember standing in the dorms, like looking out at my classmates out on that field. On the one hand, feeling very sorry for them. On the other hand, wishing so bad that I was still with them. So yeah.
That's an awesome story, because my second question was going to be, I know you've got a good story from your Ranger School experience, and it sounds like the what'd you call it, the Walmart class?
Walmart class. Yep. $4.98. That was Walmart. So I got recycled into 5. Yeah.
I cannot let this go. You mentioned they were Navy guys. Were they SEALs?
I can't remember for sure if they were SEALs or Special Boat Team. I think it may have been a mix, because we had a couple Marines in the class as well. So I don't remember for sure. So I would just say they were Navy. Yeah.
The reason I asked if they were SEALs, going through BUDS, there's a different sort of rhythm to going through BUDS, where that may have seemed permissible maybe at BUDS. Right.
Or they felt like it should be, so they just executed. So that's right. Yeah, there's a whole different their pipeline's quite different as far as even during sort of their last or up to that last week, they can do supplements and things like that. Where in Ranger School and in at least selection, not really most parts of the Q course, your diet is controlled. I mean, you know the deal. The best way to bring somebody quickly to find out how they function is take sleep, take food, take control. And so it is a proven and successful method. So,
yeah, I mean, if you want to have influence over a person, do those 3 things, and you got them, right?
Yeah, that's right. Right.
Which of those 3 was the worst for you?
The control piece, coming out of college, like I didn't have any illusions of authority at that point because I was a brand new lieutenant. So I had been to BOLIC, but we were all lieutenants and everybody thought they were in charge. So the control, I looking back, I really had blinders on. I was like, do what they say, do it the way they say it, and let's just move out, do your role, depending on what position you had. So much so that I remember after I graduated and we put your rank back on, I had to go to the, I don't remember if it was a supply room or the ops desk there, staff duty. And I was standing at parade rest talking to the specialist, and he called me sir. And I was like, oh crap, that's right, I'm a lieutenant. I'm back to being a lieutenant again. So the control piece really wasn't me. Fortunately, food impacted me, but I wasn't controlled by food. Now, I didn't have the weight to lose like some of the guys. So I don't know, maybe mine was more of an internal sort of self-doubt, at least initially, was because as I was comparing myself to those around, did I have what it takes? And so if I made an error, I was probably harder on myself than I needed to be. So mine was probably not any one of those. It was the culmination of, the impact that had on my ability to actually perform at the level I expected of myself and what was required of the course. So.
Yeah, I did not go to Ranger School, but I've done 3 days straight in the field kind of thing. So I'm familiar with lack of sleep. I've read recently, a lot of things happening to me recently, that sleep is actually the most important aspect of well-being. So I imagine for a lot of folks, it's the sleep thing.
Right. It does. I'm learning a lot as well. One of our initiatives here at UNG we can talk about is holistic health and fitness, and a program with some wearables for our peak performance initiative. But I think there's two groups of people in the world that think sleep does not impact them, and it's Army officers and college students, both of whom actually need a good bit more sleep than they think they do. The ability to function. I remember then catching yourself falling over. You're standing up and you're so tired, you're literally, falling over. Or if you sit down or let your guard down for 1 second, you shut down. So it's really a warning to us. And it's probably dangerous because so many of us think we function at a higher state of performance than we actually do when we're at that sleep deprivation. So I agree there's a requirement to test it. I agree you have to master those fundamental skills, like the functioning, like the weapons. You got to be able to do that in any state. But we're kidding ourselves if we think when you get that decision to strike or no strike at 0-200 after 36 hours of no sleep, 48 hours, that your mental acuity is not impaired, and you have to build guardrails to do that. So I've seen that effective and ineffective.
Yeah, I've been around a few hard chargers, and they are no good after 48 hours of no sleep. And they're actually being irresponsible as leaders, not getting some shut eye. Great point. And what I think our focus, we have a relationship with the Walter Reed Army Institute for Research, and their sleep team up there came down and briefed our cadets. And they talked about sleep as a weapon system, and exactly what you said. It is based on what we're learning and should know about sleep. It's irresponsible for us. You can't control everything, but what you can control, you have to acknowledge and not pretend. So that's one of the cool things now, just like you're saying, as we've learned this too late, really, to have a big impact on our career. I'm super excited that I get to hopefully impart that to our replacements who are going to be standing on that wall and say, look, here's the reality. And what we're trying to do, we've got an inaugural wearable partner where it measures it and you can see it. And then we can show them performance and say, look, this isn't witchcraft. Like, this is physiologically what happens. So yeah, Ranger School was my first introduction to that. And I probably, like you, took away some of the wrong conclusions, like I don't need sleep, but it's clear now. Yeah, I mean, look, world-class athletes figured this stuff out a long time ago, right?
You're right.
Yeah, and so
you're 100%.
I'm glad the military's catching up finally. And oh, by the way, Ranger School shouldn't change that much.
Right. No, I agree. That is there for a very specific purpose, and that's what I said. I think it really puts you to the point where you have to come to grips with yourself, and that's what a lot of the folks who leave realize they can't do that. So, I think it's very useful in environments like that. But what the takeaway isn't how tough you are. The takeaway should be how much you realize it means to you performing at the level you need to.
Absolutely. All right. So you had this idea of Green Berets in the back of your head, starting out as it sounds like a teenager, maybe. And then you have this NCO while you're at Campbell who lived what you had read about.
Yeah.
And so that there's sort of this, now it's coming to the forefront, I imagine, as you're at Campbell, or maybe it was at the forefront the entire time. You can tell me, but you knew well before you were commissioned that you wanted to eventually be a Green Beret.
Yeah, absolutely. Those were, and it's probably a little too strong, but it is true, even though I probably didn't admit it to myself. Those were my heroes. And then, as an officer, you can't put your packet in until you're first lieutenant promotable. And the process has changed over the years, and I'm not sure if it's still the same, but I could request special forces specifically. There for a while, you put your packet in and they said SF, Civil Affairs, or PSYOPs. When I was there, when I was going through the process, I could specifically request that. So you're right. But there was also a point where I had to commit. And I do remember sitting there thinking, those same thoughts I had in Ranger School. Fortunately, that I was successful, and I had that as a background to say, I know I can do hard things. I know I can perform at the level that's expected. But I had that same sort of point when I had to actually submit that packet for Special Forces and say, I am willing to put myself out there and potentially fail in order to be tested so that I might succeed. And Paul, that I didn't appreciate it at the time, but I think that is so important for us as humans, and especially officers and leaders. Like, if you're not willing to fail, then you need to rethink. If you're not trying to do hard enough things where you might fail, then you need to rethink about how comfortable you are where you're at. So I remember that as I put my packet in, because there was a real probability that I was not going to live up to those heroes that I had. I will also, I'll sort of jump ahead and say, I didn't get to go to Jumpmaster school until I was in 2004. I had a chance as a team leader. We were deploying a lot. And long story short, I shifted that spot to another guy on my team for different reasons. But I had the same realization there as a major, like, oh my gosh, like that's when the pressure came. When I realized, like, I'm an 04 SF, guy who is not Jumpmaster qualified. This is my one chance. If I screw this up, like, I will never go back. And my boss had already told me, Colonel Ashton Naylor, great guy, still stay in touch with him. He's got Naylor Forge. He's making knives and stuff. But he's like, if you don't pass, you'll be finding another job, right? But it was the same thing that I realized, like, if I'm not willing to fail, same thing at a much lower level with things like the physical fitness test, like these leaders who don't take it with their team, like, what are we teaching our young guys? Like, So anyways, yes, I came to that. I said, I will always regret not trying. And so I put my packet in and made it to Fort Bragg. Literally the dumbest idea for entry ever. So I did it as the middle of a PCS en route move from Louisiana. So we left. So I was actually MI, branch detail armor. So first 3 years armor, and then I was supposed to go to MI transition school, become an M officer. Well, because I put my packet in, I was scheduled for infantry advanced course. So I did SFAS, Special Forces Assessment and Selection, en route to the advanced course as an MI branch detailed armor guy who went to the armor basic course. So we drive overnight from Louisiana. I already have a kid, to Fort Benning, to Brett's house. As a matter of fact, that's just when we were together. Go to Brett's house, offload my wife, all of our crap, get back in the car after driving overnight, drive to Fort Bragg all that day, spend the night with a buddy, and the next morning I signed in to start SFAS. Looking back, I'm like, what an idiot, So
because the process, as I understand, it's 4 weeks long, right?
Yeah, 3 or 4 weeks. It varies a little bit year over year, but generally.
And then you went to the advanced course after that?
Yeah. So finished selection. So again, I'm still young, in my mind, somewhat invincible. So that's the best thing that worked out for the family. So that's the timeline. Slept on the floor at my buddy's house and then signed into selection the next day. Finished selection, fortunately got picked up. And then we were at Fort Benning for the infantry advanced course. So, yeah.
You definitely were young back then.
Yeah, that's right.
It's a comment about your physicality. It's also a comment about your mental outlook.
Yeah, it was, and again, looking back, if I would not have been selected and I was already scheduled in at Fort Benning for the infantry officer advanced course, I have no idea what branch I would have stayed. I assume they'd have left me an armor officer because I didn't go to the MI transition course and all. But it's one of those things where perhaps being a little ignorant of the true risk of my decision was good, because I knew I wanted it. And understanding risk is really, and being able to codify that, I think, is what really good leaders do, both inside and out of the military. And looking back, I'm like, I probably didn't really appreciate career implications if I failed, but I do look at it fondly in the sense that I was convinced I wouldn't fail. And I think that's important too.
Well, and I think this goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway. You're definitely the kind of guy that believes either intrinsically or very consciously, nothing ventured, nothing gained.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Who dares wins, chance favors the prepared. Absolutely. Those are some of my key. Now what I'm trying to instill in the cadets and even my kids.
All right. Every time I talk to somebody who's been through Ranger School, and then I'll use your phrasing, the wickets that are required to get a Green Beret, or to earn a Green Beret, which one is tougher? And by the way, this is the second time I've ever answered this question because it's pretty rare to find somebody who's been to both.
Yeah. I will. Yeah, sure. I would say they were both tough in different ways. So ultimately, I would have to say the Special Forces pipeline as a whole is tougher because of the duration. And so you've got selection, which is only 4 weeks, and that's an intense suck, very specially designed to see about individual capacity as well as the ability to work well and lead a team. Very successful, very good model, even as things tweak, like I said, year over year, class over class. But then when you get in the Q course, I mean, some days are just grinding. I mean, it took me longer to get through selection, the Q course, and 6 months of Arabic than I was a team leader. When you really stop and think about it. So the duration there at a high level of expectation and evaluation of performance, being under that sort of what felt like a microscope for such a long term could be grinding. So that's where you relied on your team. And also, the two distinctions between SF and Ranger School, which everybody probably knows, but my characterization, at Ranger School, they're in your face a lot of times. There is a component of physical aggression that is very valuable, and some of that's by the RIs, yelling at you and your performance. You're boxing, you got bugle sticks, all these other things. In SF, there was a very real physical component, but they didn't yell at me at all. They barely talked to me. I had a number, and they would look at me, write something down, and then look at me. And you don't know if it was good, you don't know if it was bad. So on the Ranger School, being able to keep your composure, being able to focus, being able to, in a sense, play the game and understand, versus NSF, it was just, it was mind games, in a sense. Now, the reason for that, like I said, is that individual capacity and the ability to do your best with very limited instructions. So different purposes, different outcomes, but the premier leadership school, Ranger School, very effective at producing leaders who have endured, stressful conditions and proven they can lead well is important, versus finding an individual who is comfortable thriving in sort of a complex, high risk, but also ill-defined environment on the SF side. I love the illustration of a Green Beret as a PhD who can win a bar fight. So I got to start working on my PhD and maybe find some local bars just to make sure I can still. I had a warrant officer. He's now Steve Finney is the chief warrant officer at USASOC. He's like, you get a chance to prove you're a Green Beret every day. So now that I'm out, I got to look for those opportunities better. But yeah.
I love your answer. It's a very thoughtful answer. The other guy I asked that question to, we went to high school together. He's a couple years ahead of me.
Oh, cool.
VMI guy.
Yeah.
His very pithy answer, because it's just his personality, was to say the one I went to first was the harder.
Oh, fair. Yeah, there's some reality in that, because there is value in having done hard things. 100%. Matter of fact, that's what I try to tell the cadets that as often as I can. Like, I recognize we're asking you to do hard things, but there's a reason for it. So yeah, it's actually a good answer.
Yeah. I was talking to an entrepreneur, a guy, he's in his late 20s, but he's going to be an entrepreneur his entire working life. And he said the first experience is invaluable because you now have built confidence and a bunch of learnings that are going to set you up to make the second endeavor much better, easier, whatever positive words you want to associate with that second endeavor. And he said, and the other lesson he said was, just take the next step, whatever that next step is, do it.
You got to do it. That's right. My pithy experience comment is, experience is what you get right after you needed it. So very true the way you just described it. Once you have that experience, all of a sudden, you're like, okay, I've been here before, or something close.
Yeah, close enough that you have the confidence and willingness to keep moving forward.
That's right.
Yeah. And I don't have any great suggestions for you what that next hard thing is for you.
Stick with PhD in a bar fight. That's good. I know I can get a PhD at my school, and there's a few bars, so I'll keep you posted.
I'm fascinated by you learning Arabic. Was it because the Army system already knew which group you were going to go to, or was it you did well enough on the test, the language test, that they said well, you scored high enough that you can learn Mandarin or Arabic, so we'll put you in the Arabic?
Yeah, it was really the latter, but a little bit of a combination. So I apologize that I don't remember this specific enough to give you a really good answer, but your group, I can't remember now when your group assignment versus your defense language aptitude test takes place, which the higher you score on that test, the higher category of language you could take, which is exactly the example you gave. So if you were doing the first group, Chinese might be the equivalent. For me, I was, looking back, like of all the times to try to do really well on a test, that's probably the one I shouldn't have, because I scored high enough. And I think, honestly, I'm being 100% honest with you. I don't think I'm great at languages. I think I was just a good test taker because, the whole left brain, right brain piece. So Arabic was a struggle. My second born, we had our second kid. Let's see. So I was in the qualification course during 9/11, like everybody that was in the Army during that time, I remember exactly where I was, but we also had our second kid while I was just before I went to language school. So I distinctly remember thinking to my daughter she was actually before language school, but she was still young, learning to talk. And I'm like, I hear you. Just give me a subject and a verb. Ball, throw. I know what you mean. We don't need all those extra words. Like, let's just keep it at the basics, because that was sort of my approach to Arabic. So,
Arabic. So, did you have to learn to write it as well as speak it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but not to write it so that I could study it. We were not evaluated on our written capability. It was reading and listening. Which also the listening part involves speaking. So it was really speaking / listening and then comprehension. So there was some writing, but yeah, learning to read the opposite direction and new alphabet and all those things. I do not think I am a good language learner. I had Spanish in high school. So the crazy thing is I get Arabic. I'm assigned a third group. Sub-Saharan Africa was what I was expecting. Of course, while this was going on, 9/11, global war on terror, and I end up in Afghanistan for 3 rotations, 03, 04, 05, as soon as I got to my team. So 01, 02 in the Q course pipeline, end of 01. And then very early 03, like January, I signed in a third group. And then 90 days later, we were going back to Afghanistan for my team. First time for me in 03. And so I've got this newfound Arabic language. I won't call it a skill, but I'm like yelling at everybody in Arabic on objectives and stuff. Of course, they're speaking like Pashto and Farsi, which yes, have the same alphabet, but they're different. It's like French and English have the same alphabet, a little different. So by my third rotation in 05, I had tried to pick up a few words in Pashto, but it was I was disappointed I didn't get to maintain that skill like some of my fifth group brothers who went different places and actually got to use it. So, and then I end up in 7th group as a battalion commander, of course, Central, South America, and Mexico, which has nothing to do with Arabic. And I remember just enough Spanish from high school and college that I tested and changed my language from Arabic to Spanish. So that was my sort of language approach. But
all right, Bryan, there's a lot more for us to go over, and I do. You and I talked about it before we started recording. Love the notion of posterity. I want your granddaughter to listen to this someday. I want your kids to listen to this. Your wife may or may not listen to it. Spouses don't always listen to these. It's funny to me. I'm hoping your wife listens to this. And so I want to talk about your combat experience. I also want to talk about fun things like when you were a captain, you were Captain Kirk.
Oh, yeah.
And there's some fun things behind that I'd love for you to share. All that being said, I really appreciate this conversation. I can't wait to get back together to have more conversation. And the next time we chat, it may be a few weeks from now if schedules work out. The idea of you trying to become a PhD so you can defend yourself in a bar, maybe you've made some progress towards that.
There you go. There you go. It's a deal. I would love to follow up with you and hope that, I see myself, Paul, as a regular guy who had the blessing of good family, good friends, good role models, and a willingness to try. I am amazed that I've had the opportunity to serve with such special, amazing people, soldiers, friends, and had some leaders that, as I'm fresh off of my time in the Army and, the peers that I've worked with who I struggle to see myself in the same, category just based on how much I look up to them. And I would love to follow up and talk to you about definitely some funny stuff about being Captain Kirk, as I went through. And if I want somebody, I'm going to be honest, if I want somebody to remember my name, even to this day, I make a comment about being Captain Kirk and it never fails. Like they never forget me because he's such an icon. And my daughter met William Shatner in Texas at a Comic-Con while she's down there doing the weather. They pushed her out to do this thing. So she couldn't wait to tell me that she sent me a picture like, do you know who this is? Of course, we're like, who doesn't know who that is?
Right.
But she said he was so excited. He couldn't believe that you were Captain Kirk. And he said he was so thankful for all this stuff. So yeah, great. One of the greater parts of being an Army captain was being Captain Kirk.
I think William Shatner was probably as excited about that as you were.
Yeah, I hope so. I got plenty of funny things to tell you about that for sure.
All right, awesome. Well, I appreciate you doing this.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to wherever you listen to podcasts. We'd also really appreciate if you'd rate and review us. You can find us at scodupodcast.com.